Good afternoon, Albright Fellows, Albright Institute, guests, attendees. Welcome, welcome. I'm Nina McKee, the Program Director of the Albright Institute. I'm so delighted to have you here with us for the 15th anniversary celebration day, and we're going to continue our day with a conversation about the history of the Albright Institute. I'd like to first welcome our panelists. Beginning with the end, at the farthest to the end, we have Provost and Leah Gellin Porvu, Dean of the College, Andy Shennan. In the middle, we have Professor Joseph Joyce, who is the founding faculty director of the Albright Institute and the Margaret Ball Professor of International Relations and Economics. And finally, to my right, Secretary Albright's longest-standing friendship, Wini Freund of the class of 1959. Welcome, and thank you for being with us. So a 15th anniversary, it's an opportunity for celebration, of course. It's a time to look forward to where the Institute can go. It's a time to look around to see where we are right now. It's also a time to reflect on where we started. And I've invited our panelists to speak about the beginning of the Institute because they were here at the beginning. They are some of the great contributors to the beginning of the Institute, and they've also stewarded the Albright Institute along its journey. I'd like to begin with a very simple question, which is, what was your experience of how the Institute began? And I'd like to begin with Wini.
Well, good to see you all again, wonderful Wellesley women and the few men who are among us. So after Madeleine left the State Department in 2001, she and I were having a conversation, and I said, you know, something has to be done at Wellesley College to honor you and your service. You know, the former secretaries of state had these big institutes, James Baker at Rice University and George Shultz at Stanford. What can Wellesley do? So I boldly lifted up the phone, which is what you did in those days, and called Diana Chapman Walsh, who was president then. I didn't know her. I met her, but she had no idea who I was. I introduced myself, and I presented her with this problem. What can we do to honor Madeleine? And she said, she laughed. She said, you know, we've just concluded, I think it was a $40 million campaign. 400. So she said, we can't build a building like those men were able to do. And of course, the men had their old boys networks with a lot of big corporate people who could donate lots of money. She said, but we'll think of something and you'll hear from us. And I think that's when she probably brought you into it, Andy. And so I kind of stepped back to see what was going to happen. I remember coming up here with Susie George, who was Madeleine's, at that point, she'd been her deputy chief of staff at the State Department, and she was with her in her new endeavor at the Albright Group. And Susie and I sat with David Blinder, who was the vice president. And he said, well, you know, we're working on it. We're going to figure it out. And I guess you, Andy, must have turned it over to Joe and Joanne. And when Madeleine and I were first presented, I know you went down to Washington, as you both did, to meet with Madeleine. And when Madeleine saw the structure that you all had developed, and we saw the first Albright winter session, we were blown away by how wonderfully it worked and how it did all the things that one would hope it would do. And I have to say, 15 years later, it's hard to believe that it's 15 years later, the basic structure of the Albright Institute, the combination of listening to people with great knowledge of global issues come during the day, and then you're being presented with these unbelievable issues to solve in little less than 2 weeks and present not only to us, but to distinguished visiting professors, really incredible people like Wendy Sherman and Carol Browner and Samantha Power. It's just been extraordinary. And I mean, I have to turn it over immediately to Andy and Joe because they're the ones who developed this incredible structure which holds to this day. So I salute you both.
Go ahead, Andy. Pick it up where Linda.
Thank you, Winnie, and it's great to be here with you all. And it's great to think about all that the Albright Institute has achieved in the last 15 years, and you're all a part of it. It's been a great addition to Wellesley College's programs. I'm a historian by training. One of the things I think you know when you're a historian is that each person's history is individual. So there's not a single received account of how the Albright Institute began. I love, though, how Winnie started, because I was kind of on the other end of the phone, at least metaphorically, when she called Diana Walsh up to talk about the idea. And the feeling in the senior leadership room was, of course, we should do something to recognize, and something meaningful to recognize, one of our most distinguished alums. But what should we do? And one of the challenges we had is that as a liberal arts college, we don't have the same capacity that Stanford or Rice or research universities have generally, of just sort of like adding a new center over here or a new institute over there. That wasn't how we were constructed. We're a college. And so we had to think about what would be a good way of recognizing Secretary Albright's career and her contributions. Our first idea, honestly, which we spent a very long time talking with the Secretary about, she was very patient as well as diplomatic, was the idea that we would maybe house her archives here at the college. That had happened with some of the previous secretaries of state, and so we talked for academia moved slowly, maybe 3 years, 4 years. We talked about the idea that we would bring her archives to the college, but over time it became clear that that was going to be very challenging from a logistical point of view. We'd have to build a whole new building, and this was pre-digital in many respects, so that wasn't the right thing to do. And so what we needed to do was to come up with the right way of doing it. And I'm going to leave the right way of doing it to Joe to talk about, because really he and Joanne Murray, who was then the head of Career Services, that was called the Center for Work and Service in those days, now called Career Education. They were the ones who devised the solution to the problem. I was trying to figure out how to get there without knowing what the solution was. And there were two other things that really had an impact in directing us ultimately towards what we did. One is that the college was having very extensive conversations, the trustees, the faculty, the senior administration in particular, about what role Wellesley College should have in the world as an advocate for women's leadership, especially women's education, but women's leadership. And there were a lot of voices in, especially the more senior positions, who felt like we needed to take this on as an initiative. And in a way, we were having that conversation about how Wellesley, as a college, could have a voice in the world at the same time as we were grappling with how do we adequately recognize the achievement of this alum who had been so powerfully in the world. Those two things came together. And then, in the spring of 2006, President Walsh announced that she was stepping down from the presidency. And President Walsh and Secretary Albright, at least from my observation of it, had formed a very close collaboration. And suddenly, the person that the secretary was counting on to figure out how to recognize the secretary on our campus was going to be leaving. And that really accelerated the time frame. We went from academia time to rest of the world time. And within a couple of weeks, the trustees created a working group. It was called the Working Group on Wellesley's Voice in the World. And it consisted of a lot of the senior trustees, and some of us, including myself, who were in the senior leadership. And we were given the task of quickly, before President Walsh stepped down in June of 2007, what kind of solution were we going to propose? And so we started working on that problem. And my recollection is that Joanne Murray, who was the director, as I said, of the Center for Work and Service, came to see me one day, and she and I worked closely together. And she said, we have this program in January called Management Basics. We had it for years and years and years. It was a 3-week program, not for credit, where mostly alums would come and talk to students about how they had made their careers in different kinds of business, different kinds of sectors. And what Joanne said to me was, how about we don't have Management Basics, and instead we have a 3-week program in January focused on global affairs, and we name it for Madeleine Albright. And then there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and I reached out to my colleague, Joyce. I'm going to let him take it from there.
So Andy calls a meeting, and he invites a bunch of the economists and the political scientists and maybe other folks to come. And I remember very clearly sitting in the classroom we were using, and Andy's up at the front and basically says, we'd like to honor Madeleine Albright in terms of her 50th reunion, and she would like a program, period. So we look at Andy, and he's not any more forthcoming, and we look at each other and basically shrugged our shoulders and thought, a program in what, you know? Because there really weren't any details at that point. So what do we think? Well, she's a diplomat, so she wants us to train Wellesley students to be diplomats, which wasn't true at all, but that was our initial response. And if that's what she wanted, she wasn't going to get too far with us because we were academic economists and political scientists, et cetera, and that's what we did. So the meeting kind of ended inconclusively in terms of something being planned for the future, and we kind of dispersed. But I started thinking about it. And I myself had gone to Georgetown, where Madeleine eventually was on the faculty, and the International Relations School, the Walsh School, and had done an IR undergraduate major. And I knew that you could put together different fields, and together you would get a view about, for example, international relations. So it could be done. And I actually had been on Management Basics, so I knew about the January program and knew exactly how it's formatted. So I went to speak to Joanne and said, you know, I might have some ideas about how to do this. And for a couple of weeks, we'd meet periodically with yellow pads of paper and just write down ideas. You know, we could do this, we could do that, one thing or the other. And did indeed agree that it would be the 3 weeks in January. First 2 weeks would indeed be various people who themselves were in policy areas or faculty here who were in policy areas. But it wasn't just that, because I wasn't going to have them just sit there for 3 weeks and absorb information. The third week, the people in the program would have to come and give presentations themselves. No grading, so calm down, everybody. But nonetheless, you are going to be giving a presentation in front of Madeleine Albright. That should be enough incentive. So we put together this draft of a program. Andy, I remember going to Steve Marini of religion because I knew Madeleine liked religion. So I had a religion professor in there. Takis Matakis, a computer science, was in there. So we had a bunch of people from the Wellesley faculty and a few other names and ideas. And we sent the program down to Madeleine Albright and then went down to visit her. For me, the first time actually speaking to her. And we're shown to her office at Albright Stonebridge, and we're sitting there, and it's a beautiful office, a beautiful day. I've met a lot of people by that point in my life, but this was Madeleine Albright, you know. So, you know, it was a slightly higher level than what I was used to. So I must admit a certain amount of trepidation. And then, all of a sudden, the door opens. Alice, this human volcano, walks into the room, and all of a sudden, there's Madeleine Albright. And she looks at us, and she says, I loved it. And the relief, the adrenaline going down was so amazing because we had no idea what she was going to say. She then talked to us about the program, and being Madeleine had studied it very carefully. She knew what we had written down and gave us some feedback, but really was extraordinarily positive. So we walked out of that meeting thinking, well, if nothing else, we have Madeleine Albright on our side. So, you know, that's at least a place to start. So we started then building upon it in terms of actually inviting people. I do remember that spring, after the 50th reunion, there was a formal announcement of the program. And it was done at the field house, which was full. I'd never seen so many people in a building here, seriously, before. Every seat was taken. And Madeleine got up on the stage and explained what was going to happen in the coming year. So it became official. We're going to do it. We had information session for students, Obviously, they wouldn't know what this was, but they heard the title. And we did have an information session in Tishman, where I believe we're having dinner tonight. And every single inch of that room was filled. Not just the chairs, I'm talking about the floors. It was huge, the response of the Wellesley students. They wanted in right away. So we figured from there, we have a place to start. So we had our program with faculty and other speakers, including some Wellesley alumni. We chose 40 women to be the first Albright Fellows. They'd be together for the 3 weeks in January, and we'd house them together. And we had a calendar to meet. So we basically went on from there, and indeed the first program began in January of 2010.
Incredible. I mean, I was a fellow. I could benefit from this beautiful program. So thanks to you three and to the others who were part of this. Wini, I'd like to bring it back to you. So you heard the program was announced, and then what happened? What made you come to every single year of the Institute, and what have you seen in your time in terms of transitions?
So as Joe said, the program was announced at our 50th reunion in 2009, and the first cohort was to begin in 2010. I think there's somebody here from that first cohort. Yeah, 2 people. Great. So the first year, Madeleine was the distinguished visiting professor. Their professorship was endowed by her college roommate, Mary Jane Durnford Lewis. Madeleine loved it. She loved the concept, and then when she became the DVP and heard the reports that first cohort gave, she and I were both blown away, and she said to me, this is fun. I think I'll come back and do it next year. The idea was that there was going to be a new DVP every year, and she'd help find that person. So the next year, and she said, you're coming with me. So I said, of course. And another of our classmates and good friends joined us as well. So Madeleine came the second year, and she was the DVP, and she loved it even more. And she said, well, from now on, I'll get other people to be the DVPs, but I'm coming every year because I just love it. So we came every year. We would stay in the college club where a lot of the events took place. And she just loved every minute meeting all of you who were the former fellows, and she would have loved meeting the current fellows. She established relationships with some of you. It was just something that she looked forward to every January, and even at the very end, somehow she pulled herself together to be on Zoom with the 2022 fellows, and it obviously was an indication of her dedication and love. And the other thing I just want to say is that Diana Chapman Walsh, former president, has loved it so much that she was willing to be a member of our Ambassadors Council and to mentor students. So we're very grateful to her and you, Andy, in the beginning, who said, okay, we're going to go for it.
Thank you, Wini. We've been so appreciative of your very gracious time with us, and you also connect with every fellow who passes through these doors. So, and it's really a wonderful thing. Andy, I'd like to turn back to you. So, Albright, you mentioned a little bit about this Wellesley in the World concept. How do you situate Albright as furthering the Wellesley mission as well as the Wellesley in the World mission?
I think Albright is central to our aspiration to be in the world, and to be in the world making progress on the issues that are most relevant and central to our mission, to our educational mission as a college for women and committed to women's leadership in the world. If you look at the strategic, you probably haven't all looked at the college's strategic plan, but you should, because it's a great plan. It's on the website, and you'll see that one of the pillars of it, this is just a couple of years old. One of the pillars of it is Wellesley in the world, advancing Wellesley in the world, and it's a very glossy, visually compelling presentation. There are photos, and the one that is right there at the beginning when we get to Wellesley in the world as a goal is, I believe, a photograph of Albright fellows gathered round. I think gathered round the secretary, as I remember. I think that's so fitting. Because as I said, when we started the Albright Institute, it was in the context of wanting the institution to take more of an external-facing role, play an external-facing role in the world about the issues that matter to us. And I think the secretary was 100% behind that effort. She thought it was the right thing for Wellesley College in today's world to be doing. But at the time, it wasn't universally popular. And maybe Joe don't tell our faculty colleagues, but there were a lot of members of our faculty who weren't sure that that really should be central to the work of Wellesley College. Joe and his colleagues had to do a lot of diplomacy themselves to get the faculty on board, especially in those early years. And I think it's been very effective. And the fact that our current strategic plan, looking out into the future, is completely clear and emphatic about our need to continue that work, to do it more effectively, to do it not just in Albright, but in all the other activities of the college, in all the academic departments, in all our centers and institutes, to be thinking about the impact and visibility that we have in the world. All that, in my mind, I trace back to those conversations with Secretary Albright. She was the trailblazer in that effort. And we are much the better as an institution as a result of it.
Thanks, Andy. Joe, to bring it back to sort of the programming pieces, what were some of you mentioned before some of the important pieces, the multidisciplinarity. What were some other elements that you really hoped the fellows would take from the program?
Well, we also learned a lot on the job. There's a lot of on-the-job training, and I'll mention maybe one or two of those things that we hadn't planned. It was clear after the program had finished, it worked. We had 40 very happy Wellesley students, and they're missionaries, so they're telling their friends all about it. They're telling the other faculty about it, and I'm getting the, what did you do in January, Joe? questions, and trying to explain just what we've been up to during that time. But among the things we figured out had worked so well was putting the 40 fellows together in the same space. Because we realized after we said goodbye to them for the day at 3 p.m. or whatever, they went back, had dinner together, and then would talk. And would talk with each other about the day's events. And would have these incredible conversations going back and forth about what they thought. And it was clear that was just as important a part of the program as the things we had programmed during the day. And I just didn't think about that beforehand because I don't live in a dorm. But if you do live in a dorm, you understand right away. Of course we talk to each other, and that's what we're going to talk about. So we're very pleased about that. The other thing that I think became more important, Nina, was not just having the fellows sit there for the first 2 weeks listening to other people talk, but giving them activities. Things, literally get them up, have them do things. So among the very first that we did was a neat project that was proposed by Lynn Turbach and gosh, I'm going to blank out on the name for a second, over at the Science Center. And I don't know if you guys still do the same, do you do the same one? Amy Banzer does it now, yeah. And they do it now, so I guess those of your fellows know exactly what I'm talking about. And that was a hit. People really liked that as like an initial activity. So over time, we began to evolve the program in that way, more and more realizing that a lot of it was happening not under our control, and that was fine. Number two, giving the fellows more things to do, to be more interactive instead of simply sitting there passive, and that was a good thing to do. And those are things we added on over time, but the basic format, including the third week of the presentations, we very much liked the way we're doing it. And obviously the fellows acted very nervous the first 2 weeks and would say how worried they were. And they would get up in front of Madeleine and oh my God, were they incredibly good. You know, over and over again, you'd get these great presentations by the fellows. So that's something that worked out very well.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I mean, I'm in this position. We haven't changed a single thing. It's been an excellent model. I'm going to sort of close down our time, but the question I'd like to ask, we have a room of current fellows, of alum fellows. We have other fellows who are out in the world and who will watch this. And so what are your hopes for fellows once they leave the program? And we'll begin with you, Andy.
And I thought you were going to begin with Winnie, so you messed me up. What's my hope for that? Well, from having sat through quite a few of the sessions over the years and hearing the secretary talk about complex issues in the world, complexity is always something to be embraced actually, and grappled with. Embraced. And one of the reasons that I think the idea of having such an interdisciplinary format works is that problems can only be understood from multiple perspectives. And so my hope is that fellows in the future continue to get that powerful lesson, continue to feel empowered by the experience of being a fellow to address those crucial issues. And also, carry forward in their own lives, as I know you all will, and they all will, the essential value of gender equality. That's really what is motivating not just the college, but I think this part of the college. And I think keeping alive the memory of one of the great statespersons of the 20th century and 21st century.
Thank you, Andy. Joe?
When I began, one of my motivations was to, in a sense, break out of the usual day-to-day bubble of being immersed in whatever we're doing. Faculty, students, administrators, there's always a list of things that have to be done soon. And it's very easy to live in that list. And I saw the Institute as a way for the 40 people we would choose to get out of that bubble and to see things you ordinarily wouldn't see, and to learn things you didn't know and meet people you hadn't met. And that would be a challenge in the best sense of the word, that the 40 fellows would hear this and say to themselves, there's something here I don't know about. Maybe I should know more. Or there's something here I could do. Maybe I should think about that more. And that was really very important to us at the beginning. And I hope it's been successful in that particular sense, of, in a sense, giving the fellows new information and watching what they do with it. The other part of it, which was also always implicit, and I know Madeleine thought was important, was some notion of service. This wasn't just to burnish your resume, okay? There was a reason why we were spending time and money here at Wellesley to do all this. It's to give you, the fellows, the chances and the opportunities to do more in the future, which in turn would pass down to other students as well as the rest of the world. And that was very important to me. So to be here at 15 years and 600 fellows, I think we made a start.
Thank you, Joe. And Winnie?
Well, your women will make a difference in the world. That was a Wellesley motto, and I think that those of you who've been through the Albright Institute have and will, and I hope you continue to do that. Madeleine and I never imagined the 600 fellows who are now out in the world making that difference in every possible realm of life in this complicated world. And she would be, and always was, so proud of you. So continue to do that. I'm sure you will. I think one of the things I've heard from fellows over the years is how important being put on teams of students with other majors from other parts of the world, working together and learning how to work together as a team. And what I hear year to year is that those fellows who you served with as a team member have become the closest friends that you take away from Wellesley, that you've remained close friends wherever you are in the world. And as I said to you, was it yesterday or the day before? Just, always reach out, and I hope you will continue to do that, to connect with each other. And I want to say one more thing. I am so grateful to Paula, as Madeleine was, for your unwavering support of the Albright Institute. In the interim, it wasn't necessarily there, and you brought a strong commitment when you became a president, and you became a friend of Madeleine's, and I'm happy to call you a friend as well, and I really appreciate it, as I know she did.
This is such an important program at Wellesley. It was so transformative for my experience, and it's really an honor to be in this position, to be able to work with the fellows and and to see fellows continue to connect with each other and embrace complexity, embrace empathy, carry forward the legacy of the Secretary in the best way possible. Thank you to the three of you. Thank you to President Johnson for your continued support of the Institute. And thank you for sharing the history of the
Nina,
Institute.
have you chosen the
today.
dates for the 20th reunion yet? We'll still be here.
Thank you, everyone.